Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Climate Action Forum, and today we're going to talk to Metin. Now, Metin's interesting because he came along to what we call one of our community hubs, which was looking at climate change and public health. And he contributed really eloquently to that particular hub that he came to. And Metin has a CIC, a community interest company called Direct Community Support. And he's trying to, in that company and in the work he does, redefine the relationships we have with each other and redefine the relationships we have with our community. So I thought it would be really, really interesting to talk to him today. So Metin, thank you for joining us. And maybe
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really pleased you're here. Can you start very briefly to tell us something about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so the CIC actually was something that formed out of my for-profit company. So I've got a for-profit company called Direct Eco Solutions, and it's an environmental solutions company. We find environmentally friendly solutions to business problems. But obviously, we all know what happened a few years back with the pandemic. And we just wanted to really support individuals that we were hearing were struggling within the borough and around the borough of Enfield. And we just put on our social media as part of our company corporate social responsibility, offering help to individuals or families that were struggling with food security. And it just grew and grew to the point where we really needed to have a standalone organization with its own bank account just to be really transparent financially. And to deal with the overwhelming support that we were offered by the community to help others that were really struggling during the pandemic.
Okay, and so what is it you're trying to do with Direct Community Support? In a way, what's your mission?
So initially, it was, like I said, just to support individuals and families with direct food support. So one of the issues that we kind of heard very early on was that individuals who had never, ever been to a food bank before or had never been on universal credit were finding it really difficult to get onto the appropriate lists or to get approval for universal credit. It could take up to 14, 16, 18 weeks sometimes. And that's just not obviously, adequate for somebody who needs food in their cupboards right now. So our immediate aim was just to be able to support individuals on a trust basis by getting food to them immediately and as quickly as possible.
So, in a way, you responded to an immediate emergency. And is that what started it all, or had you thought about that beforehand?
No, so that is literally what started it. So, like I said, we as a for-profit company were acutely aware of directors of the companies that we would work for, who had only ever taken, say, for example, dividends, weren't eligible for the support that the government were offering, couldn't get furlough. They had literally fallen through the cracks. And because of the way that modern life is, people are living from paycheck to paycheck, month to month, even if you're a director of a company. Like some of these companies were turning over £10,000-20,000 a month, but majority of that goes out in expenses. So, when that income stream literally stopped when lockdown happened, these families found themselves in a position where they had no money for food. So our immediate aim was just to make sure that people had food in their cupboards.
So how did you do that? I mean, did you give them advice about food banks to go to, or did you actually start a food bank yourself?
Yeah, so it was literally from our own home through our company and our own money. We just went and bought bags of shopping. So the way it happened is we put it out on social media that we were looking to support any individuals or families struggling. That first social media post got 2 families in contact with us. We quite literally went to Tesco, bought 4, 5 bags of shopping for each family, turned up on their doorsteps and delivered it to them. I then did a social media video saying that we had supported 2 families, and that's when it got traction. That next weekend, we had 10 families contact us, and it was literally just replicating that over and over again. But at the peak of it, we had over 10 volunteers delivering weekly on a Saturday. We had over 50 families, over 300 people that we were delivering food and non-food support to. But then we started getting monetary donations. We started getting individuals and neighborhoods collecting food for us, which we would then go and redistribute. So, like I said, over the 2 and a bit years of the pandemic, it just grew legs, and the support was overwhelming from the local community.
And did you collect food from the supermarkets and from, retail companies, or where did you get it from?
So we were like using the monetary donations to buy food, but we were also put in contact with other organizations, shops. So we had a couple of local supermarkets that were donating tinned food to us. We worked with another organization called Edible London that was based in Tottenham and Haringey, which is a food reclamation charity. So we would buy fresh fruit and vegetables from them to the tune of about £100 a week, but they would then top that up to about £150 to £200 value in terms of supporting us. We got sponsorship from Warburton's, so we would go weekly and collect bread from the Warburton's factory in Brimsdown. And it was just about forging those links with individuals, neighbourhoods, and small and even large businesses in and around our borough.
And you told me when we were at the community hubs that, yes, distributing food is one thing, but you said don't forget the allotments. Growing food is important. And that's something you're involved in as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so over the 2.5 years of the pandemic, it became really apparent that there was a mixture of people that needed support. Those that had just found themselves in the circumstances that they would never have imagined if it weren't for the pandemic and the lockdowns. Other people that were, systemically caught in a poverty trap. And you could forever be delivering food to those people just because of life chances, opportunities, or decisions made in the past. But what we wanted to really focus on was the long-term support they needed wasn't just bringing food and non-food items to their doorsteps. It was about bringing true food security to individuals and households. And that came in the shape of about 6 months ago. I came up with an idea which we call Seed to Safe. And it's a play on the whole seed to plate idea of knowing where your food comes from and it ends up on your plate. The idea of Seed to Safe, though, is to teach individuals and families how to grow food in their gardens, in their front gardens, if they have access to an allotment, or utilizing public space such as schools. So we have a project in Churchfield Primary School in Edmonton where they have an allotment, but it was disused for the last 3 to 4 years. And we've taken that over to grow food for parents and children in the school and the local community that live around the school.
You say on your website that you want to define the relationship that we have with each other. Is that using allotments and getting people to think about where their food comes from, food to plate? Is that what you mean by redefining relationships, or do you have something wider in mind as well?
So it definitely starts off from that perspective, but it's much wider. So again, like you've mentioned on our website, if you have a look at there, one of the first things that you see as the visuals on our website is the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations a few years back went out to every country in the world and said to them, what are the things that are holding your residents back from thriving rather than surviving? And they distilled a list of over, I think, 400 different items down to these 17 broad categories. And not to go through all of them, but the main ones are things like eliminating poverty, eliminating food poverty, water poverty. So for us, redefining that relationship means understanding what we have as a community around us as our resources and how are they equitably given out to individuals. So there's allotments that are unused, there's allotments that are underused. Food density can grow in a very, very small amount of space. So one of the things that you'll know that if you've ever worked on an allotment is that you grow a lot more food than you can actually consume when it's harvest time. So it's making sure that individuals understand how they can distribute that within their neighborhoods or their local community groups or charities, and businesses as well, to get them involved. But more importantly, our local authority. So there's so much public land that is just underused. It's just grassed over or is brownfill, or schools who outside of school time, once you hit 4 o'clock, you've got masses of green space, you've got equipment inside of those schools that are just underutilized. So opening things like school kitchens so that they can become community kitchens, school grounds so that they can carve out a small plot to have as an allotment to grow food, not only for the school, the parents and the children there, but again, the local community around the school. So that's what we mean by redefining that relationship of individuals, businesses and public spaces.
So you're working on the principle of regeneration rather than consumption. Is that right?
Absolutely. So it's exactly that. It's looking at what we normally would consume within our local area, our local community, what that consumption looks like in terms of the interaction with small, medium, and large businesses, and then making all of those organizations as well as the individuals understand that if we attack the problem from a slightly different perspective, then we can take ownership of that security that we're all seeking. So for example, the food security issue, individuals just don't know how to grow food anymore. It's a skill set that we've lost with generations gone past, but it wasn't really that long ago. If you think back to World War II and the rationing, the majority of gardens in the UK were growing their own crops to help with the rationing issue. But the minute the war finished and rationing was lifted, and that generation's knowledge has kind of passed, we've lost that skill set. So it's bringing that back to households, really.
I noticed, and you mentioned it already, on your site you have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Is that the sort of general principle or the framework that you're working to?
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is. It's a framework that we then look at individual sustainable development goals and look at what we can do locally to tackle each one of those. So our initial tackle was the food poverty issue with direct support of bringing food to individuals. But that's, like I said, now expanded to looking at the wider issue of food security and growing food organically as well. And that's really the key, because you could bring security to people in terms of they might financially be able to go and buy food, but the quality of that food has changed drastically over the last few decades. So there's a study that's just come out that shows that fruits and vegetables that you buy from the supermarket are actually 50% less nutritious than they should be had they been grown organically. So even if you've kind of dealt with the poverty issue and people have got money to go and buy their own food, we still haven't really tackled the problem of food poverty because they're still not getting the nutritious diet that they need. And poverty and malnourishment has been linked directly to school attainment and your life chances. So it's about breaking that cycle for the children, more so, helping the adults as well. But it's looking at the generations to come and how we can prevent them from just being stuck in those kind of poverty traps that we see in and amongst their borough.
Yeah, I mean, future proofing is a real problem, and how we think beyond one or two generations is something we all have to do now. I mean, you talk about relationships between individuals, but you also talk about changing the relationships between groups. And are you trying to look at how that can be done by creating a bottom-up approach to that?
Yeah, so this is a new sector for us to be involved in. Like I said, my background is always being corporate and professional, and coming into the public sector, coming into the charity and the community sector has been a real eye-opener, because what I've kind of seen in the last 3 years of working in this sector and supporting and helping is there are so many amazing organizations that do amazing things within our community. The problem is that they're always fighting and for funding. So we are technically pitted against each other in the funding battles, and they are isolated in terms of the work that they're trying to, from their perspective, make sure and ensure is being done in our community, means they very rarely get a chance to branch out and link with each other. But there is such an intrinsic link between all of these organizations and the problems that they're tackling with. And I'll give you a really easy example. So we work with an organization called Family-Based Solutions, based in Chayside, which deals with domestic abuse, mainly from child to parent, but also parent to parent and parent to child. And I asked them to look at their statistics. They've been running for 10 years and they've got hundreds of case files. And I said to them, could you have a look to see what proportion of your case referrals actually stem from food poverty as being one of the major issues that's led to domestic violence? And they themselves were shocked that 30% of their referrals of domestic violence have started because of food insecurity and food scarcity. So you can see there that an organization like that would tackle the actual problem of domestic violence. But unless we've actually tackled the problem of the food scarcity and food poverty, then we're just set to reenact that problem in that family group over and over again. And potentially, generationally, the children might pick up those issues. And again, we're back into that same cycle. So the only way that these local groups can actually tackle their problems completely is to make sure that we're linked up together and we're working together, so that there can be a referral made to one organization who then realizes what the underlying problem is and make sure that we refer them to other organizations to tackle those problems. And more importantly, to work collectively for the funding pot. Because, our organizations quite literally can take hundreds of thousands of pounds to run year on year. And because, like I said, we're battling for these funding pots all the time. However, if we apply for the funding pots collectively, we can get more money and then distribute it more equitably across these organizations as well.
What you said about family-based solutions is interesting, about domestic violence often being a result of food poverty. And it's something I might take up with Aisha and her brother at FBS, because that's a really interesting point. You also talked about how important it is for groups to link together and find out what each other is doing. Do you think the community hubs that we set up was a reasonable way of doing that?
To be honest with you, I think it's the only way. It was an amazing forum. There were so many organizations there that I already knew, but equally there were so many organizations there that I'd never linked up with. And it was just an amazing forum. One, to be able to hear individual organizations and individuals' stories, but then more importantly, to see the sharing of information and ideas. Out of that one hub came so many links, came so many ideas that would benefit all of us. That is, I feel, the only way that these community groups can get a space and a forum to be able to link up with each other. Because just trying to do it by yourself in your normal week-to-week running of an organization, it's nigh on impossible, just because of the pressures that are there on a day-to-day operational basis.
We're obviously looking at the sort of outcomes of that hub, or the two hubs we had, and we had a mini one at Chicken Shed with young people, and we're looking at how we can follow up on that. And we've got months of work, because there were so many ideas came up. But one thing that came up is people felt that we shouldn't have a one-off hub; they should be regular, and we should try and develop it. So we're looking at how we can do that in the east and how we can do that in the west of the borough as well.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to have regular hubs rather than just a one-off, where people can get together, meet each other, and also help social map what is going on in the area?
Yeah, the one-offs are amazing because, like I said, it gets you in contact with people that you might not necessarily have met or seen. It's a great forum for coming up with ideas as well. But the problem is then the accountability for those ideas. If you just have these once-a-year type forum events, what happens is a lot of these ideas will just fall by the wayside and they never really get developed. But the regular, say, monthly, bi-monthly, even quarterly meetups ensure that these ideas that we come up with can then actually grow legs and start to walk, and then eventually run, because we can assign them to individuals or groups. We can make sure that there's accountability there to make sure that these things take place and happen and report back on. So I absolutely think that it's essential that we have the regular meetups.
It's also important, isn't it, that we have it in the East and the West? We did it in Edmonton and Eastern Enfield, partly because we knew there were groups there that were seldom reached. People weren't communicating in the right way, and we wanted to find their ideas. But then someone pointed out to me, it's important to do it in the West as well, because that's where they have the largest carbon footprint, and therefore we should tackle that issue as well. Do you go along with that?
Yeah, and again, the thing that kind of opened my eyes doing this for the last 3 years was I'm in Edmonton. I'm based in Edmonton, so I know quite acutely the issues that we face in this side of the borough. But then the support requested was quite interesting to see how that panned out in the west of the borough. So it was, like I said, professional individuals who had never found themselves in this position just because of the challenges the pandemic had shown us. But equally, there are pockets of social housing and social issues in the west side of the borough that I kind of think gets overlooked, because we're so focused sometimes on the east-west divide on the A10 that we kind of forget that there are pockets of issues on the west side of the borough. And then, like you've rightly pointed out, the carbon footprint of the borough is very different because of the uses of properties and businesses and cars, etc. So there are unique issues that we have to think about as a whole borough. And I'm hoping that the forum kind of erodes some of those east, west, and north, south issues that we do see assigned to the borough, and just tackle it as a borough-wide problem, really.
Do you think you talk about erosion? Do you think, as well as eroding that division, it might also, if we can develop it effectively, erode the division between the voluntary sector and the statutory sector? Because we had health authorities coming in, we had the local authority coming in at one point, and we created a collaborative network of equal partners where no partner dominated, the statutory bodies didn't dominate.
Yeah.
Those collaborative networks where we involve everyone, that are inclusive, is important, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would extend that as well to say our businesses as well. Again, the small, medium, and larger enterprises. One of the things that always really concerned me is we have some really big players in our borough, and we know the borough is kind of expanding with some of its development projects, and we're looking at bringing in more larger scale businesses to the borough. Those businesses have got a onus on them to understand that normally they will recruit locally, so it's local people that add to that business's success through the work that they do, but then it's the local consumers that utilize the services or products of that business. And I passionately believe that they have a duty of care to put back into those communities that that their funding literally comes from the pounds and pence that we spend. And I think hitherto we haven't really seen some of those big players taking a real interest in protecting our borough and our most vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, we have to work on that. I mean, we did have the co-op there, and that was really great. And of course, you're right, we need to get social enterprises as well. I mean, you're a CIC and you came. I mean, you in your website, you talk about the importance of social enterprise, where they're interested in social gain and not just profit. It's both. Those are valuable contributors to a collaborative network, aren't they?
Massively. And there's an amazing organization down in the borders of Edmonton, Tottenham, in the Meridian Estate called Blocks. And it's a massive organization that has grown over the last couple of years that looks to support individuals, especially those that are looking for social enterprise, by affording them the opportunity to have a full workshop where they can rent it out in a space hourly if necessary. And it's about understanding those kind of services that are on our doorstep. That was heavily funded by and contributed to by the local council. Enfield Council played a massive role in that business's development. But until I was in this sector and kind of had introductions firsthand and secondhand, I had never even heard of that organization. So it's about making sure that as a borough, we get the information of the amazing work that individuals, organizations, and our local authority is doing, but it just doesn't seem to disseminate well enough. So there's a massive information gap as well that we need to plug.
So there's a need to social map, isn't there? Social map the groups, the statutory authorities, the premises that are available for people. We don't really have that, do we?
No, and I think that's the one great thing I think that came out of the forum was that we were starting to see the foundations of that map being formed, and it's now just keeping that impetus up and making sure that we do find out all of the amazing organizations. So like another one, which was one of the guest speakers that you had, was Claire from Cooking Champions. The new community kitchen that they've opened up in Ponders End has been a lifesaver. And I remember visiting her within the first few weeks of her opening, and she was really concerned whether they would have uptake. And it's so great to see now, week on week, them having their space fully booked out on all of their cooking days. And it just shows you what need there is there in the community. And she literally put that information out there through her social media network and her organizations that she's linked with, like us, retweeting or reposting those that information. And it just shows you how quickly that information can disseminate within our borough. And it's about making sure we do that on a wider scale. So I've seen the startings of it with the community hubs that you guys have been running.
You mentioned in earlier that when you came to that community hub, there were a lot of people there you knew, but a lot of groups you didn't know. But I also felt that we were only touching the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I think we did well, but there's a lot more out there. How do you think we can reach more people and more groups?
Social media, I think, is really the key, especially when we're talking about the younger generations. And it was so great at that hub to see that we had a few younger members of our community there. And you could see how passionate and infused they were about their ideas and about what all of the community groups that they were being exposed to. And they quite literally had something to say and comment and contribute as an idea for each organization that spoke. So I really think that the best way that we're going to be able to move forward on this is by, one, involving obviously social media, but secondly, getting the younger generation involved, because their networks and the way that they disseminate information is very, very different to how we consume information. And I think through them, you can still get through to the older generation, obviously through their households. So I think that is our key target, really. If we can get the younger generation involved in our groups and our organizations, and I can give you another example. So I've currently got 3 Duke of Edinburgh award students who are doing their bronze award, coming to our Sea to Safe project at Churchfield Primary School. That now has given me the ability to, one, link with a group of young individuals, but more importantly, it's now given me a communication link with the school so that we can discuss about our projects. And through, organizations like schools, like awards from the Duke of Edinburgh perspective and others, Jack Petchy, etc., it's a great way at a local level, at grassroots level, for the work that organizations do to spread that information through households.
I mean, getting young people involved is important. We have another project in NCAF which has been working with primary schools and developing a competition where they write illustrations about climate change and so on. And we have a prize ceremony on November the 24th. Intergenerational work is important, isn't it? It's not just about people of my age and your age thinking about the younger generation. It's also about the younger generation thinking about generations unborn, going 100, 200 years ahead. We've got to future think in a way that we haven't really since the Industrial Revolution, haven't we?
Yeah, and that's exactly where the Sea to Safe project really comes in, because what it does is it breaches that generational gap now, in terms of we work primarily through primary schools and we get their parents involved, but then the link is extended to grandparents. Also, we work with Age UK Enfield, and the aim is next spring to then be able to afford days and weekends to Age UK residents who can come and get involved with the project, the allotment projects, in an accessible way. But more importantly, for them to be able to share and spread that knowledge. Because like I said, there is a wealth of knowledge out there that if we're not very careful, within one generation, we will lose that information, we will lose that knowledge. And then what we do is we quite literally plant that seed in the youngest generations, those going through primary school. We teach them a skill set and a way of communicating with other groups within their community. And then what we hope then is that that passes on to their new household when they become parents, and it just becomes the norm again, rather than it being the abnormal thing, which it is now, for youngsters to get involved in garden projects and allotment projects and growing their own food. It's bridging those gaps in a way that plants a seed that will then just stay generationally as knowledge within families.
Well, maybe we can talk to you in the next few weeks about how we might do that, because Age UK is also a part of our network. And I think if we can find some interesting developments and projects on that, that would be really good. Let me ask you then, I mean, we're getting close to the end of the interview, but how would you like to see direct community support develop in the next few years?
So from a borough perspective within Enfield, we'd really like to see multiple Sea to Safe projects. So we're going to look to expand our school projects, but more importantly, I need to be able to start working with the local authority. I really want to get an in with the local authority so that I can have their ear and explain to them our project. Because like I said to you, I see the way that we utilize our streets, our green spaces, our abandoned spaces as being critical. We need to take a leaf out of some of our European neighbours' books and understand that we need to plant trees that are fruit trees. We need to utilize park spaces and green spaces so that people can actually see fruits and vegetables and salads growing and have access to them in a way that we've never really thought about in this country. So that's what I see as being our prime target and goals for the next couple of years within the borough. Broader and wider than that is really kind of making sure that there is a direct community support in every borough and in every area. So we'll be looking to branch out to every borough in London so that there will be a direct community Enfield, a direct community Barnet, etc. And then hopefully when we get that embedded and working within a framework that can be replicated, expand outside of London so that we have that same approach to the shires as well, and then beyond, hopefully.
Okay, so if anybody wanted to find out more about you, make contact with you, find out what you're doing, how would they go about it?
So we've got our website, obviously, directcommunitysupport.uk, but we're also on social media, both Instagram and Facebook, as Direct Community Support, and our Seed to Safe project as well. You can direct messaging us, emails, and a telephone number is there as well for anyone who wants to get involved as a volunteer, or if there's somebody that they need to refer to us, or if they've got any ideas about how we can do any of the topics that we've touched on today. I'd really appreciate that.
Okay, well, we'll make sure that, that information is disseminated widely. Well, thank you for doing that, because I think, your contribution to the panel was fantastic, I thought, and you helped a great deal, and you had some wonderful ideas, and I hope we'll be developing the panels, the hubs in the future, that you can be involved in that and that we can work together. So thank you very much for taking part in the interview. It's been really interesting and valuable.
Thank you for interviewing me, and thank you for putting on and hosting those panels. They're absolutely fundamental to all of our success.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for what you've done, and we'll end this interview now.